is made up of components. And basically a component is part of your application. It is it encapsulates the view and the functionality of part of your application. So you come to your application and break it down into components. And each component is quite independent. You can develop it separately, you can test it, and then once all is ready, you can compose those components into a bigger application. That is the idea of an Angular application. So whether you are creating a small application or a big application, the framework kind of forces you to break it down into components. And this is very, very important, especially for large-scale application. And in such application, they follow, as I explained before, the single-page application architecture, the SPAR, single-page application architecture, where you have a shell page, kind of empty. It doesn't have much except loading the scripts, and it has a placeholder where you load the root component. And then from there, whenever the user clicks different links, we load different components. And you will see that Angular comes with very, very good module called a router module, or a router service, to be more precise. A router service that allows you to declaratively say, when the user clicks this particular URL or goes to this particular URL, load this particular component. So you can map URLs to components. And as the user interacts with your application, you're basically dynamically loading different components. We will see this concretely shortly. So this is what we have seen last time. And precisely, in terms of programming, a component is a class that has the annotation component. And in the class, you specify where on the page the component will be loaded. You also specify the view associated with your component. You can either put the view with the annotation, or you can put it in a separate file, separate HTML file, and then you link it with your component. We have seen all of this before. Then you use, within your template, you can use directives. Directives are, you can think of them as components. Some of them are pre-built in the framework. You just use them. And then in the class that is annotated with this annotation component, this is where you put your event handlers, and this is where you supply the data to your view. Okay. So that is the idea. And let me just to quickly remind you how this looks like. So here I have a component called display component. And you can see this display component has one property called my name of type string. And when this component is created, this property is initialized with this string value. Now, this class is annotated with this annotation called @component. And here it has two properties. Display, which is a kind of a tag, a custom tag inside your HTML page, the shell page that I just discussed. When this component loads, it will find this tag inside the HTML page, and it will load itself in that tag. And here is the template. And here I'm providing a template within the component. And some one-way binding is taking place. The data that is stored in this property will be shown in this paragraph. But not only the value will be copied there, but there is a link that gets established between this property and this placeholder. Whenever this property changes somehow, this will be auto-refreshed on the page. Yes, please.
This template can be an HTML page?
Yes. Or like when it is small thing, you can just, if you wish to keep it within the component, and the whole component will be one file. It has the view, it has the class that provide the data, and it has the event handlers that handle events as the user interacts with the page. When the view starts to become complex, you take the view and you create a partial page. What do I mean here by partial page? It's not the whole HTML with like the root HTML, head, body, and so on. It's just a part of the page. And you put it in a separate HTML file. And then you come here, instead of using template, you will change this to template URL. And you provide the URL of your HTML. So that is the basic idea. All right. So I already explained all of this. And then if you recall, these are some steps to set up your environment. There are much simpler steps later on we might see, but for now it is very important to do it manually so you appreciate what's going on. So these are well documented, or if you don't like them, you can just go to Angular.io, the website. There is a 5-minute kind of get started, and they go through these steps. But here is the summary of those steps to set up your environment. Then you just use, for now, best to just standardize on one environment like WebStore. That is one of the best platforms so far. Okay. Then we've seen all of this, and we also discussed this NPM, which is a package manager that comes with Node.js for you to download all the Angular libraries and other third-party libraries that your project will depend on. And not only this NPM, when you use it, it creates this this file called package.json, and that file will have all the dependencies. And for example, when you submit your work or you give your solution to other people, you just provide them this package.json, and they will install the dependencies themselves. Usually you don't check in the dependencies in your repository. You just declaratively put them in this package.json. So this is what we have seen so far. And we kind of seen examples how to do it. You first start with np-init. This will create the actual package.json. It asks you a couple of questions if you wish, like to change the name, the version, and so on. And then you start installing packages. Just give it the package name. It knows where it is on the web and downloads it. It downloads it for you, and also it adds it to the package.json. So when you share that solution, people will also get the dependencies that your project depends on. All right, and then we started looking into some built-in directives. These directives are needed to build the template, if you remember. And we looked at these templates. These are some example built-in directives, like star ng4, and this will allow. This is an array. It allows me to iterate through the array, and basically in here I'm declaring a local variable called hero. The local variables start with hash, and then I'm displaying that value within a list item. So this is an example of directive that comes with Angular. So for you to use this directive, you have to import it. You must import it from the Angular library, and then in the component you tell the component that your component depends on this built-in directive called ng4. But if you are using many directives that are very common, you can, instead of listing them all one by one, you can instead use these core directives, and it imports for you the common directives like ng4, ngif, and other directives. So I think just to, because I think most of you are kind of very busy with your homework. So let me just very quickly, so we are on the same page before we move to more advanced stuff. So let me go to the examples. This is Angular. This is the heroes. Let me just copy, open this, and then I'll go to WebStorm. Open this, and then I'll open a little project just to show you what's going on. What I've just explained, just to show you in concrete way, and then we move forward. Okay, I think it's already here. Let me just open new window. Okay, here is my app. So as you can see here, I have a component called app component. So it is a class called app component, and this class has basically three, as you can see here. It has three properties: title, an array of heroes, and the first hero is assigned to this object called my hero. Okay, and then I have a method here called add hero, and it takes as an input an object, new hero, and then it goes ahead and adds it to that array up there. So this is the actual, you can say, the code behind your view. This is it has two roles, as I explained. It supplies the data. Later on, we will see that this data could come from a service, or could come from the local storage, could come from anywhere. It doesn't matter. For now, we're just hard coding it. But it doesn't matter where it comes from at the end. It shows up as properties of your class. And these properties are accessible from the view. Okay? And then you have methods. What these methods do? Sorry, what is the role of these methods? So basically these are event handlers. When an event happens on the page, these methods will handle such events.
But you still have to run them, right?
Yes. Here I'm just explaining the actual class. Now, I said the component has two parts. It has the behavioral part, which is the class, the code basically. And behavioral has two parts: the properties that exposes the data to be accessible from the view, and it has the logic or the methods. Or in a simple way, as we know, all classes, they have this. What is a class at the end of the day? Yeah, it provides attributes and methods. Attributes store the data, and the methods do some actions or some behavior or some action. Okay? So a component has two parts. As I said, what are these two parts? Sorry? No, as a component, the whole component. That is the, no, basically at the end it has two parts, the class and the view. So two parts, the view, which is the visual part that the user will interact with, and the class, which is the code behind the view, that drives the view, provides the data to the view and handles event that happens on the view. Is clear what's a component? Two parts. The view, which is the UI basically that the user will interact with, and the class. What is the role of the class in the component? Two roles. Yeah, provide data to the view and handle events. Handle event that happens on the view. Okay? So, practically in coding, in terms of coding, the data is exposed as properties, as you can see here. And the behave or the event handlers are coded or are written as methods. Okay? And then on top of the class, you come and add some annotation. This is the annotation you add. You say, oh, by the way, this class is a really component. And this component will be loaded into this tag called hero apps. So here is my shell page. Remember the shell page? This is the page that will be loaded first and once and only once in the application. This page has really nothing except, of course, it loads our scripts that we need. It loads this Angular. It loads this System.js. System.js is a module that allows us to load it's a library that allows us to load modules. So in here I'm saying, please go ahead, go to this app subfolder and load a module called app. What is the extension? Here I'd say, by default, my extension is JS. So it will ignore TS and all other extensions, and it will pick up app.js. Okay? And here I am putting where this heroes-app. This is not HTML tag. If you look at the HTML standard, there is no such tag. But I put this as a custom tag. And what is this tag is for? Yeah, this is the place where the component will be injected on the page. That's basically the role of this shell page. It has two basic roles. One is to import or load all the scripts that we need, and of course CSS files and so on. And then provide a placeholder where our root component will be injected. And then that root, from that time onwards, we will keep bringing components into this shell page. The shell page itself will never be refreshed again. That's it. It loads once. And that's why we call it a single page. Single page, which means single page architecture, means we have one single full page. This is the only page that has this header and this head and the body and closing the HTML. The rest of the pages will be partial pages. Thank you. These partial pages will not have head, will not have body. They will just have the needed part. So, for example, in here, if you see here carefully, you can think of this as a partial page. See, it starts from header 1, input, and so on. Okay, so far? Kind of clear? All right. So components has many properties. The most important ones, at least at this stage, are the selector and the template. What do I put in the selector? The tag name where this component will be injected into or loaded into. And what do I provide in the template? The partial page. What do I find inside the template? HTML and directives. You can think of them as extensions of HTML to be able to link to the data and to be able to link to the methods that are provided by the class. Remember, the class provides some properties and it provides some methods. How do I link the properties and the methods of the class with the view? Using directives. Okay? So, here is one simple directive, which is the double curly braces. So this one, it says, trust me, the class has a property called title. Just go and bind to that property. Whatever value, just show it there. And by the way, if that value changed, that property will be auto-changed. Okay, in here, I'm doing a couple of things. This is an input. We all know this part of HTML. In here, hash a new hero. This one, I am kind of giving this input a name. It's like declaring it as a variable with a name. What is the name of this input? New dash hero. I called it this way. You can call it whatever you want. And in here, these are events that can happen in this input. So this is normal in HTML. We all know HTML page is made up of elements, and these elements can raise events when the user interacts with them. So what you can do, you can listen to those events. Those are plain HTML events. This is not something specific to Angular. You go to this event. How do you listen to events in Angular? Put them in parentheses. And do equal. What do you put after the parentheses as a value?
Handler.
The method. Yes, thank you. The handler, the event handler. So in here, if somebody clicks or press the enter key, or if somebody goes out of the text box and the text box loses focus, this is the blur event. This is not something to do with Angular. This is in HTML. Whenever you have a text box and the cursor or the focus moves out of the text box, what event gets raised? Blur event, which is lost focus. Basically, it's another term. And here I'm saying, when this event happen, or when this event happen, what do I want to do? I want to call this method called addHero, provided by the class down there. And what I am passing to it? The inputs, yes, the whole input element.
You send it this kind of, right? This which refers to the object calling it, or to the DOM element that's calling it.
In here, I am passing an element that I named previously. Not necessarily, that element could be maybe, let's say I have another input here. It's not necessarily where the event is being linked to. Let's say I have... No, basically, you have to explicitly send the parameter. So, for example, I have here another input. I will call it the way I name it and give it a variable name that is accessible from Angular. I have to put the hash. So the hash here, I will call it, let's say, street, as an example. Okay? So this is an input. If I want to pass this to, all I do it like this, street. So this method now will receive two parameters, which are two input elements. The full input element, which means from the controller, from the class, I can access any property on that input element. I can access value, I can access disabled, enabled, any other property that the input element in HTML provides. It's a DOM element, basically.
So you can, use it as a replacement for form serialization.
We will come to that. But in here, this is very rudimentary way. Of course, there is a much more sophisticated way. In here, I am naming my inputs and passing them as a parameter to my event handler. Okay? If I just want to pass the value, I'm not interested to get the whole thing. I can always pass it like this. Because really, this is an object. This is an input. The input element is an object that has many properties. If you can pass the whole object, or you can pass particular property if you wish.
Doctor, it
Yes.
shouldn't be the same name. Yani new hero here is different than yani here there is new dash hero.
Okay, very good. Very good remark. So this is just a naming convention. In HTML, when you name attributes, professional people, HTML people, they like to name their IDs or their HTML, especially IDs and names with hyphen. That's the naming convention. You don't need to if you don't wish. So what I want to say, you can name this. Yeah, you can name it like this, no problem. Okay, you can name it like this, no problem as well. So Angular kind of says, okay, people follow this convention, but this convention is not is not applicable in JavaScript community. JavaScript programmers, they never name their variables like this because this will be confusing to the JavaScript runtime. Instead, they use the camel casing, which is the second word is uppercase. Okay, so in here, what it's doing, it's keeping both people happy. The HTML people, they can use the naming convention with the minus or the hyphen, and the JavaScript people, they can use the camel casing, which is if you have a composite word composed of multiple words, the beginning of each word is uppercase. Okay, very good remark. So you can either name it exactly the same, if you wish, but if you really want to do it.
If I follow the HTML convention of classes and IDs, it's still the binded variable in the JavaScript side is renamed to the camel case?
So, sorry, can you say it again?
If you kept it new dash hero.
Yes, new
if I'm
dash
trying to access this in the JavaScript in the components.
in the JavaScript? No, I don't think in the JavaScript in the
I'll have to put quotations, right? So
no, I mean this is not equivalent to something like this.
No.
No.
But when you send the variable new hero, where is that defined?
This one.
Is it-
This one is exactly the same as this.
So Angular will translate it when it goes to the programming
The
side.
name is different.
No, basically this input for the HTML programmer, the name of it is the new dash hero.
Yeah, and then it will be binded with the variable new hero as a camel case.
Yes. If you don't like this, that is fine. If you don't like this convention, you can always call it like this. No problem. So you have the choice. If you want to be consistent and avoid confusion, but this is the common naming convention in HTML. HTML program, kind of when you build an HTML page, if you have a composite word, you separate them by hyphen. But in JavaScript, you cannot do that. If you do that, the compiler or the interpreter will consider it as if you are requesting to do the minus or the difference operation. Okay? So to keep both happy, no problem. You can name it with hyphen and refer to it with the camel case. Or you can name both exactly the same, no problem. It's up to you.
We can use this.
Now in here you cannot use this. Like what I want to say, you have to name anything you want to refer to it from the controller, not from the class. It has to be named with the hash symbol in front. It is clear so far? Okay, so let's move on. Yes.
We replace a new hero with the camel case. And new hero, this will work. I just need to make sure.
Okay, this one. Okay, let us.
The add hero.
Okay. Add hero. Yes.
If we replace the new hero with a new hero one, this will work.
You mean here one? I see what you mean. Okay. Of course, we have to name them all one. Yeah. Yes. So in down here, it doesn't matter. Here is the name of the parameter. The name of the parameter and the name of the argument it doesn't need to be the same. Okay. This is like this one is basically a function that takes a parameter new hero. It could be X, whatever you want to call it. It's fine. It doesn't need to be necessarily the same name as the argument. So the parameter can have a different name than the argument. Okay?
In Angular, we don't have to define functions. We don't have to define the function keyword in Angular for functions.
For functions, this is you don't need to put the keyword function. You mean? No, this one is not part of Angular. This one is part of ES 2015. In ES 2015, when you create a class, you don't need to put You don't need to put, in the properties, you don't need to put var. And in the functions, you don't need to put functions, the keyword function. You just put the method name and that's it. This is nothing to do with this class from here up to here has nothing to do with Angular. It's a plain JavaScript. There's nothing Angular specific here. What is Angular specific is the annotation, okay, and these conventions of how to name an input, how to bind. This is called also binding. This is called event binding. I am binding this event to this method. When this event happens, this method will be called. Okay? So let me just put it the way it was, like this. All right, let me fix this one. So here, 3 ways I can call the method. Either when the user press enter, or when the input loses focus, or when the user explicitly clicks this button, add button. Okay? And then, what I'm doing here, I am going to my object, my hero. If you can see here, my hero is initialized with the first one. And I am extracting from that one particular property, which is name. And then in here, I am displaying all the heroes. So to display all the heroes, I'm using another directive called ng4. And it starts with star, ng4, and I'm saying, for every hero in these heroes, this is a local, I'm here declaring a local variable. I can call it whatever, h, x, a, I can call it whatever I wish to call it. And then I'm going and say, this line item will be repeated for each hero in heroes. And what do I want to extract from the heroes object? I just want to extract the name. Okay? And here, I'm showing you another example of ng-if, where I have this statement, and this will be only visible, it will only be visible if this condition is true. This is my object coming from the class, and this is a property saying the length. If I have greater than 3, then this paragraph will be visible, otherwise it will not be visible. I'll come back to this last one shortly. Okay? For all this to work, I need to say, by the way, all this component, this bootstrap, there is a bootstrap down there, I will explain what it is. This ng4, ng-if, these directives, all of them are defined in this library. Okay? Hero as a class is defined in my class here. It's called hero. The hero. It has two properties, ID and name. So here I am importing all what I need for this class to work. Okay, that's it. This is what the component is. Now let me show you another component, which is key up component. This is another component, very simple one. As we said, the component has a class. Component is nothing but a class. This class is called key up component, and it has a property called values. When the component is initialized, the value will be empty. Okay, and then component is a class that has this annotation component, and then I provide here the selector. This is where this component will be loaded into, and this is the template that provides the visual UI of this component. So in here I have just a header 4, it has nothing special. And then what I have here, I have an input. And I decided to call this input a box. You can call it whatever, name, whatever you want to call it. And here I'm listening to 2 events. If the user clicks enter, or if the input loses focus, what I am doing, I take this value that the user has entered so far, and I write it in these values declared in the class. remember that the view has access to all the properties and all the methods the class provides. And then what I'm doing, I'm taking those values. Whenever this one changes, this one will be auto-updated. This is what binding means. This one, as I type, when I click enter or lose focus, I take whatever is being entered on the text box and I assign it to values. And whenever these values change, the change will be reflected automatically on this paragraph, on this div. That's what this one is doing. So this one is separate component. If I want to load it, remember I have two components, my app component and this one is called key app component. If I wish I could make this as a child component of my root component. So remember I have here app component. What I'm doing here, I am asking, please go ahead and load the key app component in display. So what I need to provide, I just need to provide the placeholder where the components will be loaded. And also I need to tell, you see this directive here? I tell it which component this component depends on, the dependencies. So my component called app component, for it to work, what does it need? What it relies on? It relies on core directives that come with Angular, and it relies on another component that I built myself. This is just to show you that an application is made up of components, and these components can compose other components. This is in a very naive way, but I'll show you much more sophisticated way to compose them using the routing. Where I really compose them or load components when the user clicks on some links. That will come shortly. But the idea here is that from one particular component, I can load another one by simply providing place where it should be loaded and declaring that this component depends on another component. And this another one could be either built-in, could be a third party that you just download or buy or whatever, or could be yours that you develop yourself. And they're all the same. So you can already see where this is heading towards. It's component-based application development. Some components will come from the framework, others you build yourself, others you can download or buy or so. Okay? So it's a very, very powerful. Like you can think of here, you might have a charting component to create different type of charts, a map component. So here, similar to the desktop, those of you who have like some experience with Windows Forms or Swing. Swing application, as an example, is made up of forms. Each form is made up of components. These components, some of them come with Java, for example. Others you can buy, and others you can build yourself. So this is what this heading towards. Component-based user interface development. On the web pages, on the client side, all on the client side, and using standard technology, HTML and JavaScript. Nothing outside this standard technologies. Does it make a bit of sense? There was one thing I didn't show you is how this one is handled. Have a look here. This is the method add hero, and it takes a new hero. And here what I'm saying is if the user did not enter anything in the text box, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to enter an empty hero in my list. So if the user supplied something, I'll go ahead and generate an ID. How do I generate an ID? I go to the latest hero, the last hero in my list, linked -1, get the ID of that last hero and add one. That's the ID of the new one. And then I go and create, Then I go and create a new hero object, and I push it, and I push it to my array. And this is just, oh, you see here, once I added it, I go and clear the text box. Just as a good user experience, once it's added, it's good practice not to leave the input still have the old value. That's why it's a nice idea to pass the whole input to the class, so you can do something like this. For example, clear the value, disable the button, do whatever with the object. Or if you are not intending to do anything with it, you can just pass the value from when you are passing in the method, in the call. If you are not intending to do anything with the whole DOM element, you can pass the value that you can pass the property that you wish. It's up to you whether you want to pass the whole DOM object or a particular property from that DOM object. The good news here, once I push a new hero, I don't need to listen, oh, by the way, I have to go and refresh, or for example, in your jQuery, I have to go and go and call the function again to generate the HTML and stick it into the list. It automatically will be refreshed. You see, there is no code whatsoever. You see here, I didn't call a function to say redraw. I saw some of you doing draw something like draw HTML. So you don't need to do that here. All you do, for example, in your homework, you are doing like, let's say, students. So all you do, just change the value of student, and that's it. The page will be auto redrawn without you imperatively doing it or calling the function to do it. It is.
I was thinking of homework 3. Could you provide some kind of base solution before starting homework 3?
Yes, that's what it will be homework 2. So basically, I'll be providing homework 2, which is jQuery based solution.
As a base solution for homework 3?
Yes. But it's not really base solution. It's like, yeah, it's kind of base solution. You will redo it using Angular.
We will remove everything for jQuery and...
Yes, it's not really base solution. But it's mainly for you to kind of, for those of you who, just to reflect a little bit more on the way you did it and another way of doing it. Hopefully, the way I try to do it is more to make it as simple as possible, as minimalistic as possible, as clear as possible, not too scary compared to some of your submissions. Yeah. But at least you will see a working version, and you try to reproduce that same working version. So this way you will really either appreciate this stuff or hate it, or you will judge later on yourself, because you will have kind of experience with both styles. Okay. Any questions so far? This is what we have seen so far. Let me just run it just to kind of make sure everything is there. So the way I run it, I'll go to bash, if you remember, and npm start. That's what I remember. npm start. This will open it. This will start a lightweight server, a web server called a lightweight web server called Live Server, and then it opens the page. If you go and do any changes in your solution, this page will be auto-refreshed. Okay. So you can see here that list has been shown here. Let me just, for curiosity, just to see if this one is really named. You see, this one is not named. Although we gave it a name, hash, a new, what did we call it? A new hero. It's not named here, which means the variable name is not really, the variable name
has nothing to do with
that has nothing to do with the ID.
It's just a binding of the value.
Yes, is a way of making that input or that element accessible from the class. It's
How does the page handles the events? There's nothing online.
there is not. Oh yes, they have some magic.
They don't
I haven't looked. Sorry.
They don't have any ID, so they cannot even
They don't have any idea, which is very interesting.
At least, no, but you have Hero app.
Yeah, but this one is not uniquely identified. They have their own magic. I can't tell at this stage. I'm still in the early stage. We will see. We'll see. We'll have some examples. We'll have some examples. But there is a different magic. The way it's working is different than the traditional way. There is as I said, there is a major shift on the way to doing things. Okay, so let's keep it simple. In here, whatever, let's say, if I type something here and add, as soon as I add it, it should appear there. See there? It's appeared in the list without me calling any refresh or anything. Because these curly braces are really doing one-way binding. Whenever the list changes, it auto-refreshes. Now here, this is the other. This is one component, and this is another one. It doesn't make too much sense. I'm just showing you as an example. So in here, what's going on is, remember, if I type something, either if I press enter or if this one loses focus, I take whatever was typed and I stick it into the value. Whenever the value changes, it appears here. If you remember, there was double curly brace values. Now, if I keep typing and press enter, see, this has changed. And keep typing and cursor out, it will change the values. Okay? So that is the idea of Angular. This is the basic idea, is that an application is made up of components. This component is nothing but class. The class has an annotation component. In this annotation, you specify two major things. You will specify other things, but sorry, three major things. One is where this component will be loaded when the application starts. Second is the template, the UI, how it will look like. And in the templates, you can use directives to access the properties and the methods of the class. And then you have another property called directives. In there, you put the dependencies on either directives that come with the library, with Angular, or directives that from third party, or components that you create yourself. This is the basic idea of Angular.
What's the import?
Mm-hmm.
And that's allowed.
All right, so let me go here. Where is it? Yeah, sorry, which one you talking about? Mm-hmm.
For here, we imported the directives. Why we have to bring it again down?
Okay. Now, first of all, as I explained last time, this import has nothing to do, it's not Angular specific. So this is a feature of ES 2015. If you create a class or a function in a separate file for modularity purposes, instead of having this scary file that has heterogeneous, not coherent functions that has nothing to do with each other, living under the same roof in the same file, that's not very helpful for understandability, not helpful for usability, too scary, too complex. What you do is you separate and you say, okay, things that are related, let's say, to students, I put them in a student file. Things are related to action, I put it in action file, for example. So these are two separate files, but the actions file need to access functionality and classes defined in the student file, like JavaScript file. So to make the functions and classes defined in the student file accessible to action file, you import them. Okay. Now, once you import them, this is like, remember, like they try to make the components self-describing. From the components, you can tell which other components and directives this component relies upon. Okay, so you can think of it as this makes it visible. This imports, this import makes these classes and functions visible. And here, I am explicitly saying, oh, by the way, for you to use this component, you need these two directives. One comes from Angular team, and one is part of this project. Okay, so this is the way they have chosen to do this. Unfortunately, at this stage of understanding, I don't have like a more convincing explanation of it. But my understanding so far, the import is to make these classes and functions visible. Okay, but they decided to explicitly state the dependencies of the current components on other components. Now, the deeper reason for this, maybe hopefully it will come at a certain stage. Is clear so far? Okay. So let's move on to something a bit more. So let me just go through a little bit the slides just to consolidate what we have seen so far. So as I explained, there are some built-in directives, very useful directives. For example, this ng4, definitely you will use it. Because very often, like for example, when you create your table, instead of currently doing it imperatively and going through your list of students and looping through and concatenating or hopefully using some string template to build your row, and then you go to the table and append that row, and hopefully it will work. Okay? Instead, you do the row as a template, okay? And you just do it for one row and say ng4, and it will automatically repeat it for you. This will translate into something similar to what you're doing now, but they will do it on your behalf, not you writing it yourself. Okay, ngIf, I already shown you this. So this double curly brace is used primarily to access properties that are exposed in the class. Any property that you have in the class, you can access it through these curly braces. Now you can also use filters, which means you can take these values and apply some transformation to them. So transformations such as making them lowercase, uppercase, change them to currency, do some other. I didn't play with this. This is still from Angular 1. But let me see. If you can please give me 1 minute, I just see this guy has some example. I think they call it now pipe. Just, if you don't mind, just give me one. Okay, where is it? I just want to see a small example. Okay. Search component and pipe. Okay. No, didn't like it. Must be. I just want simple pipe. Yep, pipes, okay, starts with. No, unfortunately, no. Starts with. Unfortunately, I don't have an example. Okay. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Angular 2. I just want to show you a small example. Angular 2 pipe. Where is it? Pipe. Here is the pipe. Let me just see. Here is a small example of a pipe. For example, I'm saying here this is a date of birth, and I can basically pipe it. Those of you like familiar with maybe Unix command, where you do some action or some command, and you take the output and you put it as an input to the next command. You can pipeline commands, and the output of one becomes the input of the next. So same thing here. What I'm doing is taking the date of birth and pushing it to this formatter. I am formatting the date according to month, then day, then year. Okay, this is an example of pipes. There are many built-in pipes, especially for formatting, and you can create your own. Okay, so unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to provide a clear example. In the examples I'll be providing, one of them will be an example of a pipe, and this is basically what it means. Even in this page, maybe hopefully there is another example. You see here, I'm piping it into two pipes. First, this one I want it to be formatted as a date, and then I want it to be uppercase, like the month will be uppercase. This is what it means. Here, I want full date, something like this, full date, and pipe it to uppercase. You see here, the day and the month are uppercase. These are what pipes mean. And of course, you can create custom pipes, something like this. So custom pipe will have a name with this annotation. Pipe, @pipe, you give it a name. This is the name you will be using in your template. And it has a method called transform. And basically in here, for example, it's transforming this input value and basically returning the transformed value. Okay? And in the usage, of course, in your component, you have to explicitly say that I depend on this custom pipe. Remember, similar to we did that we are depending on that custom directives, input directives. Here we say we are depending on this pipe. And you basically, similar usage, see here, similar usage. You will, whatever value you want to apply this pipe to, just put this bars character and then followed by the pipe name. Okay, so maybe in the beginning you will not come to this stage, but maybe some of the built-in pipes might be useful, such as formatting the dates, uppercase, lowercase, and so on. So I will add a little bit more details to this one as I move forward. Okay. The other thing we all kind of already discussed, but this is one of the major powerful features of Angular. Being it Angular 1 or Angular 2, Angular 2 is even more, they added more features. This idea of binding. And it can be either one-way binding or two-way binding. And binding means you have some objects in memory. It could be a simple variable, or it could be an array, or it could be an object. And you have some visual template. You have some template, and you link the two. If it is one-way binding, any changes to the object will be reflected on the UI. If it is two-way binding, any changes on the object will be reflected on the UI, and any changes that the user have entered on the UI will be reflected back onto the object. So they are always in sync. And whenever you want to push the changes to the server, for example, just take the object and push it. Not like now, in your current solution, if you want to add an action, you have to grab the values yourself from the form, maybe construct an object, and then call some function to push it to the server side. In your case, to push it to the array and then serial, and then push it to the local storage, or set it in the local storage. So with binding, your object is always ready to be pushed. Okay? That's why you can see a lot of applications these days, even on the web. You just do things. There is no save button. It's it's always ready to send. Automatically, from time to time, periodically, it pushes the data to the server side. Okay, this is the concept of binding. And of course, these as I mentioned, these objects, anytime you can push them back to the server side and using REST services. And if you use something like WebSocket, that hopefully we will see later on, you can have a page that auto-refreshes by itself. Whenever the server has some new values, it pushes it to the client, and the interface keep rebuilding by itself. If this one change, no code from your behalf. That's it. Just set the templates properly. Every time the object behind that is bind to your UI change, your UI will change automatically, and the Angular will do the magic on your behalf. Angular, of course, it generates some code. That's why it has that compiling step. It generates a lot of code on your behalf. Okay. And the way it does it, there is a very important new mechanism that Angular 2 is using. It's not an innovation in Angular. It's something that is coming even in the next version of JavaScript. It's called observable. I still don't have any good understanding or experience with it. There's something major that will really change the way we do web development, where you can observe either some data source on the server side, or you can observe some variable, or anything you can make it observable, which means it's something different than observe. Currently, we can observe events. Currently, we can watch and listen to events, and when this event happens, we do some action. Okay? You can, with observable, you can watch a particular variable and say, if this variable changes somehow, I want you to do some action. So the Angular has a built-in support for observables, and it's not their own work. You can see here when you download Angular, you can see it has some dependency. Where is it? See here, ReactiveX. This is a third-party library that Angular is depending on, and it uses this concept of observable. Hopefully the final version of the slides will have a little bit more details. But for now, just keep in mind that a UI can observe certain variables. This is done on your behalf, but it is also exposed if you want to do it yourself programmatically. But when you do this, this double curly brace, what you're really doing, you are making the UI watch and observe that particular property. Whenever it changes, it triggers this automatic update of the UI. But this time they did it in a much smarter way in terms of performance. Before, they also do it in Angular 1, but they show the performance of Angular 2 is much, much more streamlined, much, much faster. So they improved it significantly with this concept of observables. Okay, so these are the things you can do binding to. You can come to any attribute of an input, any attribute of any HTML element, and you can set its value to a particular object or to a particular property coming from the class. So what you do is, here is the value I want to set. It could be value, it could be enabled, disabled, whatever it might be, inner HTML, whatever it might be, the actual property. Sorry, the actual attribute you want to bind to. And you say, I want to bind this value with this first name. Whenever this first name changes, I want this value to auto-change. Okay? And here, I am binding to an event. Here is like event listener. This is different. This one is different, very, very different than this. This is binding properties, which means every time the value of this variable changes, this property will be auto-changed. And here I am binding to an event. Whenever this event is erased, this function will be called. Okay? And you can optionally, it's not required, you can optionally pass the event. So click event. This is the DOM event. You can pass it if you want to do something with it in your event handler. And finally, this is a two-way binding. This is a one-way binding. This is a two-way binding. In here, if the username change, the value of the input will change. And if the user enters some different value, it will be pushed to the username automatically without you doing any coding. So 3 major things related to binding. It's property binding, it's one way. Event binding is basically nothing but listening to events and calling the method when the event is raised. And here, this is the two-way binding. The two-way in the sense, the way they have done it, this one is the one-way binding from the object, from this particular attribute to the value of the input. And then they put this double parenthesis to indicate that if the input change, then it will be synchronized or pushed. The value will be pushed to this variable. All these 3 variables, these 2 variables are defined as properties in the class, as I showed before. And of course, this by event is a method in the class, in the component class. Yes, please.
What's the difference between ng model and value? Is it both defined in the class?
Yes, this one is defined in the class. This one is defined in the class. Okay.
What's the difference between?
Okay, very good. This one is one way, which means if the input change, it does not get pushed to the property.
The difference is only in syntax by adding this, but both are ng models that are defined. Or the first one, only some certain values like name, ID, and some HTML attributes.
No. Look. First of all, this property is not related to only value.
Yeah, it could be the class, changing the class.
Yes, thank you. Changing the class, changing the inner HTML, any property that is defined in the element.
Only properties, so it's not something custom. We can't just name an ng model.
Which one do you mean? Do you mean this one between the square brackets? This one is a property as defined in the HTML standard.
Yes.
Any property. Any property.
The one he means the one down, two-way.
Okay, the two-way, this is related to the value. We bind into the value only. We bind into the value. Which means the value of this input will come from this variable. And any changes to this variable, any changes in this input, if the user types a new value, it will be pushed to the property.
But can't we see it in code? Can we see it in code?
We will see. You mean how it? Yeah, we will see a full example. But for now, just keep in mind 3 types of binding in Angular 2. You can bind to properties. You can bind to events, or you can do two-way binding. Okay. These are just some examples. Here is an example. Here, disabled. Can you see here? It's a property. Disabled. And let's say I have a property on my class called input is valid. So if the input is not valid, so the disabled will be true, and that button will be disabled. Okay. So I am binding this property in the class with this property of this element button. And also I am listening to this. Can you see here? I'm listening to this click event. And when this click event happens, I call this method. That's why, not for you to confuse, is because this is a method call. You can see a method call always have parentheses. That's the same thing. That's how they kind of come up with this analogy. So this is a method call. So the binding uses parentheses. And the other one is really just reading the value So that's why they are using square brackets to differentiate between the two. Because this is a really different. In here, we are reading the value from this and assigning it to this. While in here, we are calling this function when this event happens. Okay? And this is not limited to the elements HTML, standard HTML element. You can have a subcomponent. Can you see here? I have a component called Amazing Chart. And this component exposes a property called series. And I am passing my series from my class and assigning it to this property of this component. So it's not specific to the HTML element. You can also use it for, basically this is how you pass data to subcomponents, through properties. Okay? Components, subcomponents can also raise events. You can raise custom events, and you can respond to those events if you wish. So those of you already familiar with Windows Forms, WinForms that come with .NET, or with Swing, this is how that programming model works, where your UI is made up of components. You compose those components, you connect them, and you listen to events. And this is how you connect them, okay? Here, this is kind of a custom property. You can say this div will be hidden based on the value of a particular expression. So they also provide some custom ones like hidden and disabled. Okay, this is another example. This is another example, very, very nice example, just to show you concretely. So here I am looping through each guest in my guest list. And what I'm doing, I am passing this guest to this subcomponent called guest card. And that subcomponent exposes a property that receives this guest and does whatever with it. For us, this subcomponent is black box. We don't care what it does, but this is how we connect to it. By binding one property from our class to property exposed by that component. So there is some clear communication through properties. So subcomponents expose properties that we can push the data through, and they also raise events that the root component can respond to. So that's how the communication between the root component and subcomponent takes place, through properties and through events. Same thing, whether we are using HTML elements or we are using custom components, same programming model. We pass data through property binding, and we respond to event by using the event binding. Okay? Yes, please.
And these subcomponents will have its own view and its own class?
Yes, yes. So, subcomponents are, basically, look, component is something that is standalone, independent. For example, let's say you have the dynamo, like in your car. It's a component. It has been created by some company, and basically they have tested it, it works, and some of them even can work in different cars. But you plug it in, and it has very well-defined interfaces. You have an interface where you put the kind of the cable to connect it with your electrical system in the car, and you have some other component some other interface to link it with the engine for it to rotate. So it has two interfaces, one to receive the rotation and one to give you back electricity. But that component is standalone. Okay, that is the idea of when we do this build. So they are building blocks, independent, but of course when you plug them into this big hole, they need to interact with them where you plug them into. And when you plug them, basically you can either pass properties to them, you can pass data to them, or you can listen to events coming from those components. That's the programming model, basically, in Angular. But that's more advanced. We will see how these subcomponents will work. But for now, this is kind of the idea. I will just finish this, and I will let you have a small break. So I already explained this. This is how we bind to events. This is optional. If you don't want, it's fine. You don't need to pass it.
Passed by default?
No, not pass by default. So this is if you are interested to see the event. For example, you want to prevent the default, or you want to do something with that event. You have the whole event. The good thing here, like in Angular, you have access to the DOM if you wish, but you pass portions of the DOM to the event handler. You can pass an element, or you can pass an event. It's up to you, depending on the context. So from your controller, you have access to portions of the DOM that you pass explicitly to your component. This is just another example, very small example. So in here, this is the button. Whenever it's clicked, I pass to it the find product. Sorry, I call the find product method, and I pass the prod. What is this prod? Is the input box. The whole input box will be passed as a parameter to search, to find the product method. Okay. All right. Two-way binding. This is the one-way binding. I already explained. You have already seen it. In the one-way binding, whenever the model change, which means the properties of your class change, this will be refreshed, and Angular will take care of that. The two-way binding I already showed you. This is how we do it with ng model, with the parentheses and this square brackets, and that will create the two-way binding. I already explained all of this. Okay, forms. So when we come back, we'll see forms. This is very important. This is for us as developers. We heavily use forms to collect input from users and build the application logic. So we will see, when we come back, inshallah, we will see forms and we will see routing. Two major features of Angular. That will, once you know these two, خلاص, you will be in position of creating something meaningful and useful with this library. Okay, thank you. And let's take 10 minutes, please. 10 minutes. So we've seen, it's very critical that we cover the routing and the forms. So next time we will be in a better position. Okay, thank you. I will just switch off this. A little bit, because yours was a bit still using the ASP.NET ABC. Yeah, I kind of saw you using TypeScript.
I used the TypeScript because the first one I used, I have 3 pages basically.
Oh.
For the 2 of them I used TypeScript. For the other thing, because I started jQuery, I still have not put on it. I will try to put TypeScript also. But my question is, like, in our homework, we basically need to load the users and link them, because if we are talking about the students and to show the students who are under instructor or under advisor and have certain courses, and when we try to link these things up, gets complicated. Like, we have to use a lot of code to get this done. If you are not using Angular, like,
Okay.
if you have something,
But you could make it a little bit more. No, I will be complex. I can make it a little bit smarter in the sense that, for example, you have let's say you have a class. For example, you have class students, for example, and you have get student by ID or get. So you call that method get by ID. You give it an ID, it gives you a student object. So instead of, so at least, let me think about it. Let's say, for example, let's me just say action. Let's say action. In action, you want to get the full details of the student. So you have the actions. When you are looking through the actions, you just call a method get student. And you pass. So yes, get student. You pass it the student ID. It gives you back student object.
yeah, like for me, in the place where I wrote the bulk of code was when I'm listing the students, and I need to have, like, for example, if it's a faculty, the only students that should be listed are the ones who are taking the specific course, and the programs that in the drop down
Yeah.
should be according to the students who are listed.
Yeah.
And they should be. So here, when I'm doing the filtration,
Yeah.
I have to basically first load, get the programs that are done by this faculty,
Okay.
and then from the students, I have to filter out the students who are under this faculty.
Yes, I get what you
And
mean.
at the same time, like, we have programmer and the advisor and coordinator,
Yeah.
and they have kind of a different structure. So,
Not different logic. Basically.
yeah, but a different
Different logic to get the list of students.
Yeah. So, and all of this should be done in the same page.
Yeah, but this is where
This is
most
where-
students, like here, you should, in my opinion, you should first focus on getting a list. At the end, you make each of these scenarios a method, separate method, to make it clearer and concise, and the chances of reusability.
Because where I was having the problem where I had to write the code and like it got messier was the coordinator. He doesn't have an array. He has an ID. Basically, he doesn't have anything. The course has an instructor ID. The course doesn't have anything. The faculty.
Yeah.
The faculty
Yes.
doesn't have the course ID or the course array. The course array and the course model has the instructor ID.
Yes.
And then, like, but for the program advisor, it is he has an array of programs.
Yes. Yeah, I know what you mean.
So like, here is like you have to have these all conditions satisfied. So if it's a programmer, if it's an advisor, you will have some different filtration. If you have a coordinator, you will have a different score.
Yeah. But still, like if you look, the way you approach it is like any other modular kind of with encapsulation in mind. For example, you have a function, okay, that gets students by program, and you give it a program list array. This function should be reused at least by the advisor and the coordinator. The advisor, although the advisor only has one program, the coordinator only has one program. When you call that function, you pass that one program as an array. So at least you have one part covered, nicely encapsulated in one place. And you are not repeating it, and it is nice and reusable. You already scored 2 reusability cases, one for the advisor and the instructor. Advisor and coordinator has now one method. That's it. Then I take another method very similar to this one, but this time it will be by course, isn't it?
Yeah.
For courses,
Yeah.
for particular courses. So students that are taking particular courses. صح?
Under a specific structure.
Not necessarily. So you don't need care too much about the instructor. So the first method or function returns the students belonging to a particular set of programs. Second method gets students by course. And you pass it an array of courses, it gives you back the student taking those courses. Now these are now reusable, even if you have one course. In fact, the method inside can be polymorphic, kind of polymorphic, where you can work with one single program or single input that is not an array, or you can work with an array. Inside it can do a little check. If it's an array, if it's not an array, it will convert it to an array and then do the filter. And in the filter, you don't need to do loop. You just filter and you have a
For filter, I tried to use the filter. I tried to research something, but I had some issue with working with the objects. Like I was not able to find the correct center or something. I used something similar, but it is $.grab. It's a jQuery.
But you are treating them maybe as a string inside the element of the array.
jQuery.grep is similar to like this, but like the filtration is not like this. And maybe need to has like.
But grab
it's
gives the connotation of string matching. That's what grab, like in Unix, for example. Like if you have text files, you go through them and
I'm matching the objects in it. Like,
matching the okay.
It's very similar to this one, but like I have to use $.in_array function.
Okay, that is good function. Yes.
Actually, I have to use both of them sometimes, especially in the case of course and instructor and student, because student has an array of courses, and then I need to find that if this student has a course that is taught by this instructor.
Now it's better to do it in 2 steps, and each step is fully encapsulated. First you say get courses. You give the instructor, he gives you the courses. Then get student, you give it the courses, he gives you the student.
I think
it's more.
I missed creating the classes. I did not create.
But even if you don't, it's loosely timed.
The code is not very bad, but like sometimes it gets a bit messy, especially like in this case specifically. Otherwise, it's the other classes are still pretty straightforward. Like to get something, and like the other thing now, like I still haven't implemented that functionality, is to for the instructor to get other actions from other types.
Sorry, can you say?
Like in the actions page,
yes.
If he's an instructor, he will see that students who are in his course specifically.
Yes.
But he can request it from other coordinators or advisors. The problem I was facing here is like I loaded all the actions and I have all of the arrays in my local storage.
Yeah.
But and I kind of filtered the students by the instructor, and I have actually on my action page I don't have the student list, so I only have the student.
Okay.
And I have only the actions that are done on it by the instructor. Also because the actions are having a list of students.
The actions has a list of yes. Those.
So what I am doing is like I am trying to find if the student ID exists in that action, then list it for that student. But if I have to do it for a faculty, a type, not an ID, is kind of a triple join ID, like because
Okay, it's yeah.
because I need to find that this ID exists for this action. Who is the by whom?
By whom, yes.
And for by whom, what is the advisor type?
Yeah, yes,
So-
which one is. But again, you
It's
do
not
it
very
as,
difficult, like
as a function, basically, because those kind of little, I call them little questions that you need to answer during that logic. You don't try to squeeze them in that big in the big answer. You say, okay, let me get these little helpers. You get what I mean? So
Yeah.
those little functions will be very, very useful. Will make your code much clearer.
Actually, now I think when I started, it was more messier. But as I tried to, I got to understand that how the code how the data is structured. It got a bit modular, but I still have to go to have some more
Yeah.
functionality.
Yeah, I think so, yes. Well, Chama, you will become- No, I think yours was quite good, yeah, relative compared to the other.
They have now released the RC1 or PHP.NET 5 yesterday. Like it's the stable version. It's not the stable version, but it's ready for production.
Ah, okay, which one?
With PHP.NET 5.
5, okay, I see.
Like it was in beta before, but
Yeah.
yesterday they released the
The
RC1.
RC1, okay, that's good. It has the MVC6.
MVC6.
Yeah, I still haven't played with it too much.
I just installed it today in my laptop before my class.
Oh, okay.
I got the new yesterday.
So you are using this in your work or not? Like kind of ASP in general in this?
Yeah, not MVC.
Are the forms?
Actually, I developed it around 1 year ago. I'm thinking of porting it to HTML5, but maybe that's the beginning of next year because it's very difficult to change applications because
Yeah, especially if it's large.
because there are so many people who can be affected. So
Yeah,
and like you still have to support the other application for badges
yeah.
for the new request.
So you're using some kind of
I'm using
source control for managing the version?
in Edward.
Yeah.
It's actually local only, the Bonobo bit server,
Oh, okay.
and actually because it's only on my specific machine. I have a different story for work actually.
Ah, okay.
So I'm in a quality department and different IT department and we have corporate issues.
Ah, yeah, I see. Okay.
You have to work in a very restricted space.
I see.
You have a lot of there are many restrictions like corporate policies.
Ah, okay. It's constrained what you can use and what you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think even moving upgrading is very controlled, I guess.
Actually, I'm not I'm the only person. I'm working in a quality department, and
Okay.
when I went there, when I joined last year, they were working with papers and data
Ah, I
entry
see.
and Excel reporting and things like this.
Ah, okay.
So I tried to change it as well as I could. Like now, we are not dealing with papers anymore. We are dealing with more like Excel and Access and
Ah, okay. That's
things
good.
like this. It's still
So
developing.
gradually,
Yeah.
yeah, that's good.
I'm the only person who is working.
Developing.
Yeah, in my department, like we have other departments for development and other things.
Ah, I see.
Like it's kind of a confusing stuff.
Yeah. So it's not kind of centralized or official. It's more department level.
Yeah, it's like it's official in the department, but it's like actually if you work with for the department, you cannot. Like, the departments are kind of boundaries within our
Oh,
organization, so
I see.
we stay within that.
So yeah, okay. So we have kind of a bit similar in here. We like the ITS they're supposed to develop. We have some
Yeah.
need.
The problem is that if you give them something to develop, you never get it back.
Yeah, a long might not get what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we kind of try to develop things ourselves.
So like this is actually like we need to help ourselves, otherwise we will deal with the papers.
Yeah,
And if you ask them to do it, so
it'll take a long time. But as long as you have like the management support,
yeah, like
and they like it.
this is actually a good thing I have in mind. Like at least my direct management is very supportive and very open to anything.
Oh, okay,
Anything
that's cool.
for like supporting every project. For external helps and authorization from them. Like they also have their limits.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the main thing. It's like they can sometimes push with you. Yeah, but without management support, then you can't do much.
You cannot do anything.
Yeah. That's very typical. Well, that's good. At least you keep your skills sharp.
Yeah. As a,
So for database, you using any
SQL
SQL
Server.
Server?
now we are actually working. We are working cross-departmental some projects, but like still getting things centralized is a very difficult issue. When people on the higher levels,
Oh,
they have issues getting things centralized. Even for them.
I see. But you still have a like proper infrastructure. These backup.
Yeah, we do it like on more like our level, not as
Central. Okay,
we don't have a kind of a data warehouse or something. The servers which are working.
Oh, okay.
We have a single computer or something like this.
Oh, I see. So it's intranet, like it cannot be accessed even outside.
No, not outside. Even it's like because we have to be very secure.
Oh, okay.
So we can even for internet we are very limited.
Oh, okay.
We try to keep it away from the internet as much as possible. So we try to on standalone machines.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not the issue is more like if someone if you tell someone it's accessible, the first thing is that it's insecure.
Oh, yeah.
There is no concept of having security if it's on the internet.
Right. People are trusted. Yeah. Well, at least if it's like to make the job easier, the day-to-day inner work easier. At certain stage, sometimes you want to open it a bit to the partners. And
Like the plan is to have something that is specific
Angular.
and
I think of Angular to be
final, and then
to have senior projects with Angular.
gradually, yeah, that's good.
It will also be fine.
Which organization?
primary healthcare population. So primary healthcare population. Primary healthcare population. The health centers.
Oh, okay. So this is government.
Yeah, it's government. So the health centers, like the management of the health centers.
Okay. So the management is kind of centralized.
Yeah.
It's not like a third health center.
There is per health center and there is also centralized.
Oh, okay.
I'm part of the centralized.
So there are some decisions that are centralized.
Yes.
For example, the hiring, I guess it's centralized. Hiring, for example. The hiring.
Yeah. Like the database is more on the
Yeah.
decisions to change things.
No, it's
But like centralized, decentralized, essentially decentralized. Yeah, many departments and this.
so it's okay. Long chain.
Yeah, chains of it.
Yeah, it's quite difficult. So things drag.
Yeah. Everything.
Takes a long time. That doesn't help. Plus, you have the kind of the branches also.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So this, for example, this systems they use for administering medication that they give to patients. Those are managed centrally.
So we actually have to, like, we are in the phase of implementing centralized system or server.
So currently still like every house has their own.
We don't have a system.
But they print something like when you go to center.
It's very, so honest, no one knows really what's happening.
So for example, if you
We are learning by day by day. And the major problem was part of our before, and it's 2-3 years ago. The area was completely so, especially in the management area, people are really around us. Really happening. In the physics, we have some kind of issue with the subject because they want to follow the rules.
yeah, it's a mess. Sorry. So this one is before this one.
These are not with these are users, this one students who will try to do the same with the programs and getting here is this kind of quality. And they don't understand. When I try to box it, I cannot check
It's fading to stay serialized. We will have a picture. Okay. Okay, welcome back. Let us really speed it up. We are a bit late. So forms, two major topics to be discussed, forms and router. So for forms, Angular 2 has two ways to handle forms. There is template-based, where you put your binding between the properties, between the model and the form. Here, let me go back. So forms, as you know, we use them to collect inputs from our users. So typically, in most cases, two major scenarios: adding a new object or updating an existing object. So in updating, we typically, for adding, it's usually an empty form, where the properties of the object behind the form is empty. There's nothing there yet. And in case of updates, we go to some data source, get an instance of the object, and then link it with the form to show the existing values to the user. The user change those values, and they will kind of submit. This is very common. This is how you have been doing it, for example, for the actions in your homework. Either you are creating a new action. In such scenario, you have an empty form. Just before the user submits, you construct an object, and then you push that object, in your case, to the array, and then save it into the local storage. When you do an update, you read it, so you have an object at hand, and you have the form. So in Angular, you will try to bind the two, link the two. So whenever you change the values in the form, the objects will get auto-synced with the new values. So there are two ways to do this. those of you familiar with Angular 1, you can use the same way called template-driven, where you define your binding and your validation rules in the form itself. Or you can use the model-driven, where you do the binding between the object. You do the binding between the object and the form using code. And also you specify the validation that you need using code. So forms, let me just summarize very quickly. In all cases, whenever you're dealing with forms, you are really having an object at hand. Either you want to create an instance of it using the values the user enters, or you already have an object, you present it to the user, and the user modifies those values. During this process, while the user is entering, or like the minimum is at the submission time, you do some validation. You don't just accept what the user gives you. You do some validation to make sure the data is valid before you kind of push it to the server. So validation is very, very important when we deal with forms. So two ways. You can do the binding and the validation on the template itself. This is called template-driven approach. Or you can do the binding and the validation on the code behind in the class itself. It's two ways. Now, the Angular people, of course, are pushing towards this way more. Why is it? Why is the case? They are trying to push to do the binding and the validation on the code behind, in the class, in the code, not in the template.
Does it kind of hide, like it's for security reasons?
No, not really. At the end, all this code...
Just so we cannot see it. Maybe to achieve some of the work in the client side.
No, both of them will be, by the way, in the client side. And if they need to, you can do some async, some REST or some AJAX calls to do some validation on the server side. But still, like here, the reason why it is highly recommended, especially for complex forms, to do it in the model-driven or in programming way, is for unit testing. This aspect we have not kind of covered. Basically, anything you write in an enterprise application or in a real application, you need to test it. And you need to test it in isolation, doing each part or let's say each validation you want to create a test scenario for it. So when you have it in code, it's much easier to test it, to write a test case, to write a unit test to test that code. But if it is embedded in the template, you have to render the page and then use some more complex framework, some human tester to go and test the form. But if you use the binding and the validation in the code behind, it's more testable. And testing is very, very critical in a real application, where, in fact, in the extreme, some people even go to the extreme where they first write the test case, then write the actual code. So every function, every aspect of the application has a test case associated with it. So this way is more testable than the template driven. So, but anyway, you have both. So let's see concretely through an example and then come back to this. So here, let me jump to this one. Okay, let me take this one. All right, so here I have, okay, let me see template form. Here is the template, TypeScript. Okay, let me just show you what's going on and then I will explain it. So in here I have a form called template form component. It doesn't matter the name. Again, it is a class, and this class has annotation to make it a component. So first of all, let's focus on the class and then discuss what's going on. So if you look at the class, we have this class provides three properties. The model, which is of type hero, the powers, which is an array of strings, string array, and then we have a boolean initialized to false. And then in the constructor, we constructed an object here. These are the values of these objects, and we initialize in this array. So we have these three properties will be accessible from the template. The logic here is it's not very meaningful. When the page is submitted, we will set this attribute to submit. Don't worry about it too much. In here, in real life, you might push it to the server side to update some database or some data store. Okay, so now, where is our template? We didn't put it here because it's quite big. So we put it in a separate HTML, and we supply in here the URL, template URL, and we give the HTML. We also say that this component depends on these two built-in directives, form directives and ng4. We are using ng4 to populate a dropdown, and the form directive, we need to use it so we can bind this model, which is the hero instance, with the form. Okay? So this is just declaring what these components need. Sorry, let me just go up. Here, declaring what this component needs for it to work. It depends on these two built-in directives, form directives and ng4. Now it's time to look at the component, the view that is linked to this component. So what's the name of the view? Template form.component.html. So here it is. All right. So first of all, here's the form. So first of all, you can see here I am saying ng submit. When this form is submitted, I want to call this method onSubmit. And this method, as you saw, is defined in the class. In here is nothing, it's just I'm creating a variable called f, and I'm initializing it with this string form. Okay? Then, what I'm doing here, this class and this stuff, this is more from Bootstrap, just to make it kind of look nice. This is label and input. Okay, what I'm doing is, here is the most important stuff in this whole thing. I am linking this input. Here it is. I am linking this input with this property name. So I am binding the visual text box with the model, which is a hero instance. I am binding that input with this property name. Okay, and I'm doing the same for alter ego. Basically, properties of the objects model. I am binding them with the input. How do I bind them? Using this ng model. ng model between parentheses and between curly braces. Sorry, between parentheses and square brackets. And this one is to do two-way binding. If this property changed, the input value will change. If the user types some different value, it will be pushed to this property. Okay? Also, so two things we need to do. One is I am binding the property of my object with the input. And the second thing, not really convincing at this stage, I'm not sure why we need both. We also specify that this one is, a control. So a form, let me see. Here it is. So form is basically made up of controls. So form is made up of controls. And what we do, the controls are really, they become basically one-to-one with an HTML input. Okay? And this HTML input have one-to-one binding with a model property. Okay? So form is made up of controls, and a control is linked with a particular input. So link to, and an input is bound to a particular property. So this part is done by this attribute ng control, and this part is done by the ng model. Okay? So that's what I'm doing all the way. So let me show you one more.
So,
Yep.
why do we need that control?
Okay.
To define the validation.
Now it's kind of more to it. Let me just sorry. Let me. It will become clearer in the next one. I'm just looking for something to like this. These are very. It's a bit complicated and not convincing at first, but it will become clearer as you play more with it. Okay, so first of all, as we discussed many times, we have a component. Component is made up of class and associated view. Okay, the class basically has properties and methods. The properties provide the data for the view. You can bind to those properties to show the data on the view. And the methods, you listen to events on the view and you react to those events. The view the view is nothing but a template. And of course, this template, what you will find inside it, you will find some HTML plus some directives. So you can one thing the directives do is they allow you to link the two, to link the view with your class. Okay. Now, if we go to a view, one of the most important elements of a view, as far as us developers are concerned, is the form. Okay. So the form, as far as the view is concerned, what is a form? Thank you very much. So basically, there are a set of inputs. They could be different type: text, checkbox, select, text area. At the end, they are inputs. Lots of them. Okay. But how does the class get access to this? Okay. There are two things. First of all, okay, let me try to explain. Sorry, let me start from here. How does the form get access to the data that the class is providing? Using the bind. Okay. So I go to the input and use ng model between parentheses and square brackets equal the name of the property or the name of the property of an object that is exposed by the class. And that magically will make a two-way communication between the two sides. So far it's clear?
Yes.
This is how the form gets access to the data that the class is providing.
Yes.
Now, if I want to manipulate this form, programmatically from the class, maybe I want to hide some controls. I want to do some custom validation that I cannot do declaratively. For example, here I am doing a declarative validation, saying here required. This is declarative validation, very simple validation. If you don't specify it, you have problem. But let's say you have a much more sophisticated validation. You type in a student ID, and then the class has to go to the server side and check whether that ID really exists or doesn't exist. And if it exists, it shows you the name of that ID. So this one, you cannot do it declaratively there. You still have to do it in the class. So for you to make the form exposed and visible to the class, what you do is you say, oh, by the way, this input here will be visible to the class under the name power. So this power now, which is select input or select element, is visible to the class. So that's why we are using these two, we are setting these two attributes on each of the inputs. We're setting ng model. Why we are setting the ng model attribute? To do the two-way binding. And why are we setting the ng control? To make this input or this element of the form accessible from the code. That's why we are doing this too. Okay. Now, also what's going on here, for example, here you see here is a select, which is a drop-down. So in the select, I am using ng4 to populate it. Have a look at this. Very, very simple. I am looping through each p of power, because power is an array. And the value of each object, you know the drop-down. It has a value that is not visible to the user, and it has the text that is visible to the user. So the value, I set it by assigning p to the value, and then I put p in double curly braces, so it will be shown to the user. This is what the user will see, and when I submit the form, this is what will be passed. In this case, they are the same, but sometimes they are not the same. For example, you might show the name, but send the ID. Okay. All right. So a couple of things are also good. So by just doing this, these two annotations are the most important. This one, to make this element accessible from the code, and this one to establish the two-way binding. So far, that's all you need to do. Now, once you do this, you get a couple of interesting things going on here. In here, there is some validation going on, because in here I have something called require, which is a declarative validation. It comes with the HTML5 anyway, but Angular will kind of take over and enforce it. If you don't supply it, you can provide some custom validation error. You see here my custom validation error. It's a div, and this div is hidden if the name is valid. Okay, so this is the name, basically the name of my control, ng control name. If it is valid, I don't want to see this validation message or this error message. Same thing for here. If this one is valid, this error will be hidden. So it's a declarative way of building my form, building my validation, showing and hiding the errors, and only showing the errors when it is validity. Okay, in here we are putting simple rule which is required.
So required is like evaluated to a true or false?
Yes. If it is required, means if it is empty, it is invalid. Okay, maybe I'll just very quickly run this, and then so it can hopefully make a little bit more sense. So let me see which one is here. Not this one. Okay. All right. Okay, let me just open it again from here. This one is a bit different. Okay, sorry, let me just open it from here. Okay, and then I'll go to new form. Then I think npm start, npm start. Good, it will try to open it. Here it is. It's open. Okay, here, as I showed you before, we have the form and we have the object. We have the form, we have the object, and we did the binding between the two. That's it. The object values are shown in the form because of this declarative binding in the template. Then have a look. This one is valid, no problem. As soon as it becomes, I empty it, it becomes invalid and the error shows up. All this is declarative. I didn't do any even one line of code. It's all declarative in the template. Okay? Same thing here. Let's say whatever. Here, this. Here the drop down. And then when I submit, like the values now are whatever I have entered. Without, have a look at the code behind. Let me just show you the code behind again. Here is my component. Here is my component. You can see there is zero code that doing this magic of showing the values on the form and picking up the new values that the user entered and putting them in the object. As you can see, there is zero code. There's nothing in here, except like initializing the properties of my object. Okay. In fact, if we look at the HTML, let's look at the HTML.
You can put a regular expression.
For validators, we will see. There are lots of validations. Lots of validators you can do. Some are built-in, and you have custom validators you can write yourself. Custom validators, some of them can run fully on the client, and there are validators that need to go to the server to do some checking. For example, the example of user, like when you type student ID, you want to check that it exists. Okay? So those custom validation you can also do. But for now, we are just showing simple ones. But you can do much more sophisticated validation. So to summarize very quickly, the declarative way, you come to every input of your form, and basically you do two things. You specify, where is it? Where is my ng? Sorry, this is not the one. This is the different one. Sorry. Here, this one. So you come to every input of your form, and then what you do? Sorry, here it is. Yep. And you do two things. You do the ng model to bind your inputs with the model, and you use ng control to make that control accessible through the programmatically. Although in here, let me just try it. Let me just try it, because if I guess I haven't played with this too much. If we are not programmatically accessing that input from the code behind, maybe we don't need that. Anyway, I have removed it, and I think we need to compile. Yeah, it's already compiling here, if you can see. So let me just refresh the form. It's already refreshed, as you can see, but anyway, just refresh it. And let me see if it's still working. So it's still fine. So if you are not intending to access that input from the code, from the class. If you don't want to provide ng control equals name, you don't need to. But you have to provide the bind. So you only provide the ng control if the mapping between the... Basically, to make your inputs accessible through the code, you use ng control and you give it a name.
Doctor, what form of accessibility do you talk about?
We will see in the next example. For example, as I mentioned, you can, for example, hide it, show it, do some further validation, disable it, something of that nature. Although you can do some of this declaratively. For example, in here, as you can see, you see this button here. What I'm doing to it, I come and say, if the form is not valid, here is the exclamation mark in front of my form, valid property, I will disable this button. So you can do a lot of things declaratively, but sometimes there is no escape but to do it programmatically. In such scenario, you have to give it an ng control, give it a name. You can think of this as putting an ID on it so it becomes accessible in JavaScript. But in here, to make it accessible in the class, we need to give it an ng control mapping. Okay, this is one way of doing forms. The other way of doing forms is using imperative way. So here it is. Here is how you do it. Here is my model form, which is a model-driven form, not template-driven form. And in here, in this form, as you can see, I ask Angular to give me a form builder. This is a built-in class, and this is called dependency injection. We kind of discussed it a little bit last time. This component depends on this class. So this class does not go and instantiate an object by itself. It just asks Angular, please, when you load this component, inject an instance of form builder. And what do we use this form builder for? I'll go and say form builder. A form is made up of a group of controls. So form is made up of a group of controls. And here I'm defining my controls. This form has 3 controls: name, alter, ego, and power. And I'm saying, I want you to do the binding between this form control and this property of my object. And I want you to bind this to this property. And I want you to bind this to this property. And also I'm giving some validations here, validators. I can have multiple validators, not just one. So here is programmatically, I am defining the validators and the binding in the code behind it, in the class, not in the template. Okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Validators provided by Angular or by...
Yes, these validators are provided by Angular, and plus you can provide your own custom validators.
That's a directive?
No, it is not a directive. It's basically a class. Here is the validators. It's a class that you import from the Angular 2 library. Okay, and you have many built-in validators. I have not explored the max length, min length, not now.
Functions, right?
Let me see.
Required is a function.
Required. What is required? Yeah. Required. Not really a function, like this is a property. Like magically, like, I'm not sure how it really works, but basically you say, okay, for this particular control, I want you to apply this validation. So validation is given a name. So far, I have not explored this in depth.
But you're providing an array, right? So the position is important.
In here, let me see.
Saying the name is this and the validator is this. So if I have to validate it.
I think if you have two, I think there is, sorry, this not the one. Okay. If you have two, I'm not sure exactly about syntax. I think the second argument becomes an array. Or there is...
The first thing is the...
Yes, the first thing is the
Well,
property that you want to bind to. Okay. Second one, either this, or I think they have another function called compose. I've seen some examples. I can't recall exactly how they do it. There is a function called compose, and you can list multiple validators. Okay. Here is just to bring the concept a little bit closer. You still need more details and more examples to really make it clear. So you still have the template. It's not like you don't have the template. There is no magic that the HTML will be auto-generated. We still have the template, but this time the template only provides the ng control. It does not provide, you don't need to specify the binding here. You don't need to specify the validations here. So in another way, let me try to explain it one more time. So in the view, you still have the HTML form. Okay. In the class, you have what is known as the control group, which is nothing but a collection of controls. Control 1, control 2, control 3. Each control is basically mapped with an image. Okay. So that control allows you to access, programmatically access that particular image. So you can think of it as programmatic representation of your form. You have it, instead of accessing them through the DOM, you can always go to the DOM and look for them by ID, as you're doing now. But this is kind of an alternative way. You can access them directly by name, not looking for them through the DOM. All right.
So what is the difference between this and the ng control?
Now, all right. So let me show you the difference very clearly. In the slides, it shows the difference very clearly. So let me just show you here very quickly. Here is the difference. First difference is that in the template-driven,
Where we use ng control.
yes, we are in the template-driven. We're exposing the data. We're exposing the data, and we're doing the binding in the template. You following? Using the ng model. Okay. In the model-driven, we are creating a form model. We don't need to expose the data model if we wish not to. Okay. We are exposing the form model, and here is the second difference. Once you see them all, it will make a little bit of sense. Second thing, in the template, we are doing the binding and the validation in the view. We are doing the binding and the validation in the view. In the model-driven, we are doing the validation, the binding, and the validation in the class, in the control. You can think of it as a controller. Okay. Here is how we do it in the view using the ng model, and here is how we do it in the class. Yes. The first one, although it's not shown here, it's strange. The first one is basically the name of the object, the name of the property that we want to bind to. Okay. The third difference. Okay. In here we have data bind. If you use the template driven, you must specify the data binding in the view. Now, if you do it in the control, if you do it the model driven way, you must provide this ng control to say that this input maps to the control that is defined in the class. Okay. So in another way to look at it. In here, if you use template-driven, you don't need to use this ng control. You don't need to. But in here, if you use the model-driven, you must specify the ng control. So you can link the programmatic representation with the visual representation of the input. So your input is kind of, it's visual and also programmatically accessible. Visual and programmatically accessible, okay? And the reason why this model-driven is, as I explained, is more kind of pushing towards it, is that it is more ready for unit tests compared to the template-driven. Because the template-driven, the only way to really test it, you have to render the form. You have to render the form and either use some very sophisticated kind of testing tools that you can still drive the form as if some user is using them, which is much more kind of challenging. Or you have some human tester that goes and tests. But the programmatic one or the model-driven one, you have more ability to test it much easier relative to the template-driven. Okay. I try to provide a little bit more details. I just want to really just spend the last 10 minutes just looking into the route. So I know there are a lot of things to take in. And here, the major thing is that you need to start using it for your homework 3. Grab more experience with it. Next session, we just do one more polishing, just to make sure it's all clear. But to really appreciate it or really try to start to understand it, you have to apply it based on this basic understanding that we try to cover. So the last thing is the router. Very, very important component that makes this SPA. That the routing, which is basically where to go when the user navigates the web application. In the past, it was the job of the server side. Now this job is moved now to the client side. And then on the client side, the client side decides which components to load when the user navigates through the application. So let me again show you through an example. In fact, the same example. Have a look at this. When I click this one, okay, when I click this one comes. So let me see, it's different. You can see different objects. This one is Tornado, and this one is Dr. IQ. Anyway, so you can see when I click this, the template-driven form component get loaded. When I click on the other one, the model form get loaded. Okay, have a look. This one, what is the URL of this one? The relative URL. Slash. Have a look. This is slash. This is the relative URL. I'm not talking about the base. We call it the base URL. The base URL is the same. But this one is accessible through the root of the application, the slash. And this one, have a look. When I click this, it's hash model form. And this hash slash another path, it did not go to the server. It did not try to go to the server to get the page. It's all happening on the client side. So client-side routing typically uses hash on the URL. In fact, those of you familiar, like if you have a long page, maybe you have seen it in the long pages, you can jump in different sections of the same page. By having an ID of certain elements on the page, and on the anchor, the link, you specify the ID so you can jump to it. Okay. What I want to say is, anything that comes after the hash, it gets resolved on the client side without going back to the server. Okay. So let me show you how this magic works without too much programming from your side. It's all given as part of the Angular. So here it is. Here it is, forms. All right, so I'll go to my app component. So this is the root of my application. The root component, it's called app component. And it has this annotation, route config. So you configure the route in a declarative way. You say, if the user comes to the root, the slash, which component do I want to load? Template form component. If the user comes to slash model form, I want the system to load this one. Okay? And what I put in here, you see here I have this app component.html. Let's have a look at that. What does it have? There is the app component.html. So the app component.html, it has this special tag called router outlet. It's a bit strange name. This is where the component will be loaded. So let me have a go at it another time. Here it is. So here I am declaratively saying, configuring my routes. Say if the user comes to a slash, this is what I want, component I want to load. If the user comes to slash model form, this is the component I want to load. Where should I load it? In this tag called the router outlet. So far clear? What is this as template form, as model form?
The view?
This is this is the view. Component, remember, component has both the view and the controller or the class behind the view. This is just a name of this route. I give it a name. Tariq Salwa, Tariq Shamal, just a name. Okay? I can refer to this name later on. So every route I can name it. I can give it a name. So I can refer to it.
Alias?
In alias, yes. All right. So now, how do I construct these links? These links. Can you see here these links? The links themselves. You know, you see this link. It's pointing to slash, and this link is pointing to slash hash slash model form. Okay. Now you can of course write this by yourself. Write these links by yourself. Of course, not recommended at all. You better specify all the URL designs in your route config, and then you generate these links. You never hard code them. What I want to say, let me just give me one chance to explain this one. In here, this is one place where you specify all your routes within your application, and each route, which component corresponds to it. And give these routes a name. So this name, you should stick to it as much as you can. But this now can change, no problem. You can change this. If you're not happy with this, you say MF, no problem. Make it MF, FM, whatever you want. But don't touch this. So it gives you that flexibility to maintain your routes in one place and refer to them by name. So the name is supposed to be more stable compared to the URLs. Because the URLs, as you go through, you might refine them, tweak them. But the name, you give it a logical name, regardless of what URL you wish to assign.
So you can specify a default path, like in Angular 1?
The slash is the default.
If someone goes to a path that's not available here, can you redirect it to the root?
The default, I see what you mean. I'm not sure. I have not explored this one, but I'm sure they have thought of it. I have not explored it. Very good question. Like what you mean if somebody goes to something like this?
Sometimes, yeah. And if you put the default.
Yeah, in here it doesn't. Okay. Nothing. Yeah. But you're right. I'm sure there is a way to do it. Yeah, there is no component loaded, so the component is kind of lost. The router outlet now is empty. There's nothing in it because there is no route corresponding to this.
The outer outlet is default.
Sorry?
The outer outlet is
No, it's a placeholder where the component will be loaded.
It's fixed for the router config.
Yes, the router outlet is a fixed tag. You cannot name it yourself. Like this is a kind of a directive. It must be there. So let me now show you very quickly how to create the links without building the links yourself manually. Because we agreed that we define the links once in one place, name them, and then generate the links whenever we want to. So here is how you generate the links. And that's it. I will let you go. Here it is. So what you do is you do what is known as the router link. See here, you create a link, an anchor, A, and instead of using href and then put in the route yourself, you just put a router link equals / the name of the route. You don't specify the URL of the route, the name, because the name is more likely to stay as it is, because it's not visible to the outside world. It's a programmer defined. But the route is visible to the end users. So for example here, I can go to my users they didn't like this one. I can call it MF, model form, no problem. Hopefully, if my compiler picked it up, it should. See here, the link is MF. So this referring to routes by name gives me more flexibility of changing the URLs if I wish to. Now, okay, that's all. That's all I wanted to say. Plus, of course, the router as a class, as a class, you can also access it programmatically, and you can say, please go to this route by name. For example, you are in the action, add action. When you submit, you will go a route to their home page, to the home page. You always refer to routes by name. You don't refer to them by URL, because the URL you have flexibility to change it if you wish. So the router here, you can see it is declarative. Declaratively specify the routes, but also the router you can imperatively by code ask it to route you to different locations programmatically. Yes, please.
In the scenario of homework 3,
Yeah.
if we put the route of the component that hopefully will do the action,
Yeah.
if I give it the student ID
Yeah.
as part of the route, I can kind of inject it to the component.
Oh yeah, of course. You can pass parameters. Sorry, if you don't mind, I'll just show you this last thing. That's it. Is this hero 2? Okay, route example. Here it is. Here it is. First of all, this is the config. In here, I have if the user comes to /, they will land. Then we will load this home component. If they come to /product/ a parameter, product could be 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. It's a parameter part of the URL. Then I will load this component, product details. Okay. Now in the component, what is the name of the component? Product detail component. Here is the product detail component. Where is it? Product detail component. Where is it? Oh yes, it's defined. It's kind of strange. I defined all in here with some explanation. This is the product detail component. In the product detailed component, I ask Angular to magically give me this built-in object called route param. Okay? And then I'll go and say, from these parameters, please give me the ID that was passed. Give me the ID that was passed to the URL. This is how you access the parameters passed in the URL. Now, in the router, in the link, I'll show you now in the link. Here is the link. Or it's where it is. The link. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Here it is. Here is the links. Have a look. Here, I'm creating a link to the home route, and I'm creating a link to the product route, and I'm passing the parameter. See here, I'm giving the name of the route, and I'm giving the parameter. So this will go to the product details of ID 123 in this 1234. So I know it's a lot of things going on, but what I want to say is you can pass parameters through the routes, and the components that get loaded can read those parameters that were passed. Okay? There's much more to it. The router is very, very powerful component. There is concept of child routes, there are a lot of other concepts, but this is the basic of it. To summarize very quickly, the Angular application is made up of components. The component has a class and associated view. Okay? Now, really, when you build an application is made up of many links that the user will click as they navigate through the application. Here comes the role of the route key. Very important component. You specify, okay, when the user goes to this link, this is the component you should load. And when they go to that link, this is the component you should load. And you can also pass parameters in the link. You can pass parameters in the link, and you can read them from the component. Okay? So the examples are getting a little bit clearer. The ones I will be uploading, the final version will be much clearer, with some explanations like this for each of the examples. Plus, you also have the slides are getting much more feature complete with all the explanations that I just explained, of even how to pass parameters, and how to read them back from the component. It's all there. Okay. So the last thing that is left for next time is the concept of a service, where you have a class that can be passed around and shared across all the components. It's very interesting. Because, for example, your student list, your actions, all these are shared between multiple components. You create what is known as a service, and whoever needs it, it gets injected into that component. It's just a class that has one annotation called injectable. And you can inject it similar to this. See here, this is what injection is. You just declare it, and magically you have it. And in this case, even you have one instance in the whole application. So you have one service to allow you to read and write students, read and write actions, and so on. So this is how your application is made up. It's made up of components and services. Services provide functionality shared across multiple components. That's it. This is the basics. There is, of course, much more to it. Okay. But this framework is really, learn it very well. It exposes you to a lot of richness, where things are heading in terms of client-side web development. This is a really the latest trends of how applications are really built, component-based applications. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I kept you a little bit longer because you took a bit longer break. So as I promised, this weekend, inshallah, you will get homework 2, fully model solution. You get as many gradings as possible. Before your exam, definitely, you will have all the grading that has been done. And then you will get homework 3, which is applied Angular to homework 2, and the project until the end of the course. And you have one more thing to worry about, which is a review paper and presentation. I'll be posting the topics and the papers for each, for you to choose. I'll find some mechanism for you to tell me what you want.
Is it group-based or
individual? Individual. Okay, thank you, and I will see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.
Just presentation, or you have to write them?
You have to write, yeah. So you have to review 2 or 3 papers. But I will do my best to provide you the papers. You just need to read them, summarize them. They will be. I will try to pick up practical ones to complement what we see. Maybe to do with web security, a couple of topics, and you choose the one that's more likely. For example, testing, different ways of testing, something that will complement our coverage. I'm still working on this, and I'll provide
Extended with the same requirements.
Sorry?
The project extended with the same requirements.
Same requirements, yes. Same requirements. I started already building the model solution, at least for the complex forms, like the what do we call the rubric editor. I put one there based on group 5 submission with my own modifications. And I'll be doing the same for the complex forms. You will have one model that for your consideration. If you want to drop yours and adopt the new one, will be good. Because those are the best submission I've seen so far, with my own modifications. All right, thank you. But don't worry about the project. What I mean, I will give you guidance and support as we move forward. But don't put it in the back. Work on it as you go. And from next Thursday, come to the office hours, same time as before. Inshallah, things will move. Okay? All right. Thank you. I'm here if you still have some questions or discussion, no problem.